The Witcher, created by Andrzej Sapkoski, is a franchise I've had the hardest time getting into. I've seen the heaps of praise for the CD Projekt Red games, saw the discourse around the somehow still ongoing Netflix adaptation, and from what I've heard about the series in general, it does sound like something that'd be right up my alley. I mean, I love fantasy stuff. I grew up in Harry Potter, and now regret it. Lord of the Rings is my jam, I spent hours on Shadow of Mordor, and I played D&D in high school. I was a bard. The only bard. And the only healer. And I had healing word. I can get into any series just fine, but it's Witcher that, for one reason or another, perplexes me. After mulling over it, and mulling over it some more, and some more, and some more, I came up with a brilliant idea. Since the games take place after the books, I could just read the books. Playing a game takes a ton of focus and a lot of time, but with a book, I could literally knock out a chapter before going to sleep. And so, I did. Hence this video. I got the first book, The Last Wish, on my Kindle Paperwhite because it's slightly more convenient for me to read stuff on here. I still highly recommend reading it yourself on a physical copy from your local bookstore, especially before watching this video because there will be some spoilers here. Seriously, go read it. Read it now. Pause the video, go read the book and come back. Or just do whatever, I don't have control over your life. Right off the bat, I'm just gonna say it. This book slaps. There's a lot of variety in here, which might be a given considering that this is a collection of short stories, but to be specific, Geralt in each story is doing something different. One might have him hunting a monster, like Witchers are wont to do. Another might have him navigating through a political conspiracy, each party having some machinations that involve Geralt as much as he doesn't want it to. And one is just straight up him having sex with a water nymph. That last part is literally how the book opens up, and I was like, oh, is this why people like The Witcher? I'm kidding. Or am I? I'm kidding. In all seriousness, this structure kept the book entertaining for me, and I was always looking forward to what situation the protagonist would get himself into. And speaking of our protagonist, I found Geralt to be a surprisingly complex character. I knew from the games that this was going to be the case, but I wasn't expecting to like him so much. He doesn't fall into the tropes of tough guy masculinity typical in these kinds of fiction. He has lengthy conversations with others, he fights the Striga in the first story with emotions alongside traditional weaponry, and though he has his own code of honor, at various points he must reckon with it when push comes to shove. That complexity made him endearing to me immediately, and this applies to the other characters across the collection. King Foltest's hope that his daughter can be healed, Renfri's struggle with being hunted for something she can't control, and the Sylvan Torque who harasses a town to help his band of elves not starve. No character is one note, there are always different sides to someone, and that made the world feel more real to me. The stories themselves are also pretty good across the board. They are not only diverse in their plots, but also in the ideas they explore. From the moral dilemmas in the lesser evil to the plight of fighting against destiny and a question of price, the hypotheticals that are shown are fascinatingly intriguing and atypical of the fantasy genre that I grew up on. Sapkoski also doesn't shy away from portraying real-world issues like prejudice and environmentalism, and they're handled with a surprising amount of care and attention. Pontifications on fate versus free will form the central conflict in each story, and when I realized that, I started to fall in love with The Witcher. Also, one thing to note is that the world itself is based on fairy tales, but unlike a show like Ruby, where its poor use of them feeds into its series-long commitment crisis, about 4 of you will probably get that reference, The Witcher twists the tales in specific ways that shine a light on human nature as reflected in fiction. From the subversion of Beauty and the Beast to pontificate on the sides of love, to the illusions of Cinderella to make a point about the power of superstition, it can be rewarding in of itself to recognize what elements from what tale Andrzej Sapkoski uses. There's probably a lot more than I noticed, but overall, I think their inclusion enhanced my read-through and didn't diminish it. There are things that I didn't like though. Something that rubbed me the wrong way, and is something I didn't actually think about until finishing the book, is that the agency women in the world are given at first is very lacking. This is something Sapkoski does improve upon as the book continues, but the first two short stories make their women either monsters, dead, or just in the background. A grain of truth is the poster child of this issue because it has a really cavalier way of portraying them that, in hindsight, raised my eyebrows. Another negative is the lack of a world map. Usually fantasy books come with a world map to establish the setting, but The Last Wish cuts through that to get to the narrative. Granted, this is just a collection of separately published stories, and I assume Blood of Elves, which is basically book 1 of this whole saga, has a map. But the lack thereof in what's essentially book 0.1 made it hard for me to get an idea of where Geralt was and how far he's progressed. The same issue also applies for the lack of a glossary for terms like Strega and Kikimor. Yeah, that's pretty much it as far as negatives go. The book's highs are so high that a lot of the lows don't really impact the whole experience, which is why this section is comparatively shorter. Believe it or not, the last 2 points I brought up about the lack of a map and a glossary might actually have been a boon, as it made me focus more on the storytelling as the bits of lore are interwoven into when they are relevant to each story. In the end, my grievances with the book didn't detract from my overall positive experience with it, but if you're the type of reader that's conscious about female representation, it gets better after the first rough hurdles. Now that I've had the chance to read it for myself, I get why people really like this series. It wears the garb of a traditional fantasy aesthetic while not shying away from reflecting modern societal issues, and Geralt's journey in coming to terms with what lies in his future puts him in direct conflict with the darker sides of humanity. Its allusion to classic fairy tales and how it twists their minute details opened the door for introspection on human nature, and had me reflect on certain truths that I wouldn't have normally done with other works in the genre. In short, Andrzej Sapkoski's The Witcher stands out as one of the best the world of literature has to offer, and I wholeheartedly recommend this to anyone who wants a good read. And heck, now that I've read it for myself, I think I'm more motivated now to jump into the rest of the series. Which I'm gonna do. Right now. You can leave, there's nothing else to see, I'm just reading.